Joining us today is George McTeague, an Emmy Award-winning executive producer, showrunner, and the creative leader who has been shaping culture-defining television for more than 2 decades. George has developed and run hit shows across every major platform, from MTV, like Made, Boiling Points, and one of the highest-rated cable shows ever, A&E's hit Live PD. He's led development at Big Fish Entertainment, Optimum Productions, and MTV itself, creating everything from true crime series to lifestyle hits to docudramas. Today, George continues to deliver cutting-edge content for Netflix, Hulu, TLC, and more. George is not known only for his creative vision, but for inspiring the teams around him to do extraordinary work. And we're thrilled to have him on the hot sheet. George, welcome to the hot sheet.
Wow, that was a great intro. Thank you, Sean. Thanks, Jenna. I really appreciate the opportunity to coming on. I really am excited about what you guys are, starting up and the stories you're about to kind of listen to. It's going to be fascinating.
Agree, and thank you so much for your endorsement because that means a lot to us. And we are excited to celebrate you and all that you have done for the TV and entertainment business. Getting these shows off the ground is not easy, so we want to hear all about it.
So, my roots were, I was intern at MTV. I turned that into a 19 and a half year career, weirdly just making tapes for other producers. They were called dubs at the time, and they had a dub room, and you sat in there all day, and producers wanted copies of videos or interviews that they could study or screen. So I sat in a room for 2.5 weeks. I was actually weirdly bartending at my local restaurant in my town, and I had to give up my job there that was making probably, I don't know, $750 a week at that point. And now I had to pay to commute into the city to make I think maybe $350 a week. So and I had to quit that job. So it was a big risk for me. And that those 2 weeks turned into 19 and a half years and really shaped my life, my family, everything that I am today. I met my wife at MTV. It sort of was a springboard of how my life was going to go. So,
what got you interested in TV in the first place? Because it's, I think everybody has a different starting point. And so what was your initial spark? Like, why did you say I want to do TV?
So, my goal, whatever, I was a terrible student in high school. I had to go to community college. I was an inch away from going into the army. It was like that kind of story. And I went to eventually my college of choice, which was great, and fell in love with the radio station and sort of just having the freedom to sort of communicate. That was just sort of what it was to me. And I think years prior, my parents had a come to Jesus conversation with me while I was laying on my back in our living room and watching TV. And I think I was probably about 10 years old. And they were like, what do you want to do? What do you like? And I said, I don't know. I just like completion. And they're like, what does that mean for you? And I said, well, at the time I was a wannabe house painter. So I was like, I like seeing a wall and I like painting it and it's a different color. And that was all me. So there was this arc in my perception of what I like to do at that point, right? So they said, that's job satisfaction, and which meant nothing to me at the time, but it carried me through college. It carried me through, when I graduated college was a very confusing moment, and bartending and waiting tables wasn't job completion, even though sort of it was, but it wasn't painting that wall. So I was looking to paint that wall, and I got an internship at MTV where, a guy who was very new to the process let me write scripts, let me direct, let me as an intern, like insane. And I got the bug that summer. And then I went back for my senior year and then kept, just sort of calling them and calling them and calling them. And I got that 2-week job, which was literally like a pinky toe in the door. And I took it and I stayed and they couldn't kick me out. So I was there for 19 years, 19 and a half years and close to 20, I think, actually. But,
It was
and
insane.
yeah, that was
And it was like
just,
the good old MTV days when there was music videos and they were like defining culture for young people. Remember? It was so MTV was just roaring. That was the early 2000s, right?
well, I started in 93, so I went through like sort of um everything, right? So the death of Kurt Cobain was sort of like the first thing in my wheelhouse, which was our studio wasn't in our own building. So I was a tape runner that had to run tapes down to the studio, which was on 42nd Street all the way to 41st and like 10th Avenue.
In
Yeah,
Manhattan,
in
or Times
Manhattan.
Square,
Yes.
Times Square.
Yes. And so that was my job all day, running tapes back and forth as Kurt Cobain, which was the biggest news in music at the time, happened. Right. And then the trajectory for me was seeing it all change, right? Just all it not being so music based, but just being more story based and telling real stories and sort of trying to manage a budget of like what scripted was doing, but sort of do it like in a really cool kind of MTV way. And that became the birth of long form, which was at the time we were doing short form, which were just, specials with Eminem and Times Square and Don't Going Crazy or Spring Break or The Beach House or any of that stuff. And then it like actually turned into actually real storytelling, which was really interesting to me. And it was just a map of the times. It was like what was going on then. And MTV was always ahead of everybody else. Everybody was always chasing them. So it was a great like time to be there over those years to see it change. And unfortunately, it just didn't last and didn't push itself the way it used to. And I credit that to a lot of the people who were very good at like doing that sort of got pushed aside and it became all about money. So it was unfortunate, but it was, the best experience I could ever have. I don't think my son's 14 and he's going to go to college and figure out his first job. He's never going to have a better, we're very competitive with each other, right? Like I'm better than you at high school football. I'm better than you at fishing. I'm better than you at this. He's never going to have a better first job than I ever did. And I only say that I think I was sort of going on live PD in a sense that all good ideas, they just don't come from nowhere. Some of them do, and some of them seem like they do, but live PD had a history to it.
From MTV, you did so many things and you were sort of on the buying side of things. So let's talk about, that transition, like what you were doing, like where you eventually landed at MTV, and then from there.
Yep. So the transition in sort of the industry in the late 90s towards the early aughts, I guess, we were an internal production company, right? So I did everything from directing, producing, picking up a camera, writing, doing everything, and we did it internally. And we had a large staff that sort of producers and associate producers and PAs that were all there and all working on particular projects, whether there was a seasonal team, there was an everyday team, there was a secondary everyday team, then there was a live team. So it was just this big juggernaut of a lot of like really young kids out of college that really all you had to do was have grit and be willing to, work for free t-shirts and maybe $3.50 an hour point, because you were basically working 16-hour days most of the time, 6 days a week, and nobody knew any better, right? So this was all freelance, and you were lucky to have the job. I was working one project one summer, and I was working 7 days a week, 16 hours a day. And I broke down how much that was per hour. And I went across the street and I applied. I swear to God, I applied to McDonald's and I said, "What are you willing to give me?" And they were going to give me $2 more an hour than I was making. And I was like, huh, maybe there's a future at McDonald's. And I used that. I actually brought that application in and the offer and gave it to my boss. And I said, just give me like an extra $400 like a month. That's all I'm asking. And it worked. So,
Thinks TV is so glamorous and right?
yeah, it definitely was not glamorous at that point. I had no life. I was out of college. I was in my early 20s, right? And I was just like, I didn't know what was going on, but MTV became my life, right? So it was 7 days a week. It was fly here, it was fly there, it was be away for 4, 6 to 8 months at a time. Get an apartment, but pay for an apartment that you're never going to be in. And I saw the world. Like I went to Hawaii, I went to Aspen, I was all over the map, Cancun, different countries. Like you never knew where you were going to be. And that was really exciting. But all of a sudden I was 30 and it was like, whoa, what just happened? Like I spent most of my time working, no real sense of, am I going to have a family? Am I going to have any relationship? It was really just work, work, work. And it was great. We became a very tight community. All of those producers, would come and go, some of them, but there was a core that stayed there and a core that worked together and knew the rhythm of everything and sort of got it, and it became their lifestyle and they were okay with it. And one of the astounding facts that comes out of that period of time, which was from probably, I would say, from 1998, let's just say from to 2008, there were 45 marriages that came out of that core group.
Wow. Wow.
And I was one of them. And there's 3 of them that were 3-timers. Married,
Wow.
divorced, somebody from MTV. Married, divorced, somebody from MTV. Married, divorced, somebody from MTV. So it just goes to show you there was nowhere else to go. Like my friends were all in bars. They were all moving on. They were all having children. And I was just like, I don't know what I am doing at this point, except for working. So, and so was everybody else. I mean, there's out of those 45, there's probably, you know, I, you know, 30, 40, 50% that worked, mine being one of them. So I guess there was a lot.
I mean, that is an important point, right? Like, because, and I've thought about this many times over the years, like dating was very difficult because you're always on the road, work takes priority. Then you meet somebody that's like, oh, you're independent, you travel, that's great, that's cool, until you're like not available ever. And
Ever.
they're like, this is not going to last. Same crazy schedule as me. Like, it's always a problem.
But you had no choice, right?
No,
And then it was
yeah.
like you had to see that person every day. And that was difficult too, especially when you broke up and you had to see that person every day. It was really hard, really hard.
But you married your wife is from Nickelodeon, right?
Yes, yes. So she worked on a show called Made, which I was in charge of at the time. I guess that was 2002, one around there. And it was a show that sort of showcased kids sort of in a very kind of developmental area in high school where they wanted to make a change. And you know, the message to that show was like incredible because it was just sort of like break out of who you are. So if you're a cheerleader and you wanted to try out for band, you could make that transition. You know, all you needed was a little bit of a nudge. So basically I helped produce the first season and then took that to, you know, find the specialty producers like Jen that could come in there and have the right personality to sort of sit with a 16-year-old kid in probably the most vulnerable state that they're ever going to be in their life, showcasing it to the entire world. And, you know, having the demand of a camera on them basically 18 hours a day. So not only did you need a highly skilled producer, shooter, camera producer, an audio person. This is all in one person. And then not only that, but the personality to be able to get along with that person for that amount of time and be able to push them into doing scenes that were uncomfortable for them and just getting them through the process, which was like insane. So Jen had that special skill set that she was a lovely person. She had great camera skills. She knew how to do audio. She knew what to do if she got into a tight situation. She knew how to manage parents. She knew how to manage story. She knew once she came back into the edit how to tell that story. So Made was an enormous ask for any single person, not only how many went through there, probably 500, 600, all through New York. Everybody had to work on it because it was such a grind. But in the end was just such a great experience for everybody for the most part. I think there were like, out of like the 400 episodes that we ever did, I think there were like 2 kids that were really mad about the whole situation, and that was unfortunate, but what are you going to do?
It was an unbelievable experience, just it was just a crash course in everything. You're like, I just don't think there was 1 minute of the day where I wasn't thinking about labeling tapes or getting the logistics or calling a kid or getting a release or scheduling this or doing this and running around and FedExing tapes. This is back in the day when you FedEx tapes back. And
There you go. Just from a personal kind of aside, my wife was on her second, or she wasn't even my girlfriend at the time or anything. And, you know, this could never happen today, but she was somewhere, I think in Tahoe or Kentucky. I don't, you guys were in the weirdest places, smallest towns, you know, the craziest little places. And she had been on this um, show for about 8 weeks in the field and was breaking down and was like on the phone with me on a Saturday and was just like, I can't, I'm up 18 hours a day and this kid is cracking me and I don't know what to do. And I actually said to her, I said, well, what would really at this point make you happy? Do you need a couple days off? Does that make you happy? And she goes, well, you know, just honestly, my hair is a mess. So I just need highlights. And I was like, okay, cool. So I just Googled a place to get you highlights and I made an appointment for you. And it's, you know, tomorrow at 10 a.m. and just go and enjoy it. And like, I hope it goes well, but I'm paying for it. And I paid for it out of my own account because I
you know
didn't
what
want
that
it to hit.
reminds me of? Do you remember Goldie Hawn in that movie where she was an army somebody, and she was in the rain.
Private Benjamin.
She's like, I just want to go to lunch. I just want to go to lunch.
Yeah.
Like, you definitely had those breakdown moments where you're like, what?
So she got highlights and ended up producing the show, so it was fine. And then we got married soon after.
But a guy, you bought highlights. That's amazing. But in the midst of all that, you created a show called Busted.
Yes.
So tell me about that show.
Oh yeah. So then the sort of the kind of business model shifted from it being internal productions coming off of Made, and then for my boss to say, now you're in development. And I said, I don't know what that is. And he said, well, I'm buying a lot of expensive shows from production companies that don't know how to produce them. And instead of hiring somebody who knows development, which was like, what's development at that point? I need to hire somebody who knows how to produce these shows so that I don't spend too much money on them, because these budgets are out of control, and I'm giving producers $475,000 for a pilot. And most of those, I would say 90% of them, went to waste. And we were producing probably 20 every 3 months. So it just goes to show you, like, the mindset of, like, if I can stopgap the amount of money that's spent there. And my boss was very shrewd in the sense of saying, to stopgap that, I gotta stop spending money on producers that don't know what they're doing. But that was the shift in the business model, right? So all these kind of wannabe producers started production companies with, like, whatever money they had. I don't know where the money came from, but they would come in and now pitch to us ideas, but they would have to have sort of, something behind it. They would have to have talent behind it, whether or not it was, Ozzy Osbourne, obviously, or, whatever the access was. Like Beverly Hills High School was an example, and that's how Laguna started, right? So Beverly Hills High School said, yes, we're going to give you unprecedented access to that. And everybody was like, oh my God, we're going to do this, and we're going to change the world. And this is
that show, Laguna Beach.
Yes,
right? Remember?
It turned into Laguna Beach, and
loved that show.
Beverly Hills High School pulled out. And then, my boss, who is the smartest guy in the room, said, why did we never needed the high school? We got the kids. Let's just do it about the kids. So, and that lived on to be the Hills and forever and forever and always. So, it was the system of adapting. So we were always sort of trying to chase things. And at that point, there was the prime time, which was the 10 spot, which was 10 to 11 was the major premiere stuff that we were doing. And then we had the afternoon block that had, like, a bunch of different shows that were really fun, but they were just half hour. Like Punked came out of there, Boiling Points came out of there, Room Raiders came out of there, Next came out of there.
So wait, you're developing all of those shows?
Mm-hmm. You're either going for the 10 spot, which was like the premiere, and that's like Laguna Beach. If it's not going to be as good as that, don't even think about pitching it. Or you're doing the afternoon block, which was these half hours, more format driven, right? So one was hidden camera, one was a dating show, one was a comedy thing. It just depended on where it could go. It was sort of the second level of development for that kind of thing. And then there was the morning, which was the lower level. And not a lot of stuff came out of there, but they kept pitching it. And then Sundays were animation. So there was a team for each of all of those things. But my job in development was to come into every meeting and every quarter with one of all 4 of those categories. So you were working on 4 pilots every 3 months, as well as the series that got greenlit. And we did 38 original series a year. So it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of balancing, and it was a lot of sort of dealing with outside production companies that didn't know how to produce for MTV. And my job was to tell them how to do that. And that was tough, like working on a show called Human Giant. And I definitely was not a sketch comedy guy and had to be in the sketch comedy world. And they had their expertise that was over here, and I had my MTV expertise, right? So we had to meet in the middle somehow. And that was really hard.
Was this the beginning of production companies? Like
Yes,
prior to that, then the within the network had the producers. They were employed by the network, and now you're seeing production companies break out and pitch the networks.
correct.
And okay, and what era? What is this? Like mid
Yeah, so
2000s?
this is like 98, 2000 probably. Is like the golden spot right there. That's where companies, Pawn Stars was invented out of that. That became Left Field's golden ticket, just on basically a title at that time. And it was just like, whoa, this is crazy how quick everything started taking over from these outside producers. So weirdly, we were always ahead of the game, and then we became ourselves having to chase it, right? So like Pawn Stars started, and we were like, why didn't we have that? Cash Cab started, and we were like, why didn't we have Cash Cab? Right? Like we were just like all of a sudden like the third in line, where we were always number one. We were always the ones that were like, MTV's the one to get. MTV's the one that's going to break something. MTV is always, that prime time spot. But all of a sudden, production companies started finding a way to go to other networks like TLC and Discovery and A&E, and they started making their way forward. And then we started having to chase them, which was a bad spot to be in, because normally, again, we were number one, and we were the ones that were telling people what to watch. And now we were chasing people in order to help them produce a cash cab for us. Like, what's our Pawn Stars? What's our this? What's our that? And it was just a really complicated time, because we spent a lot of time sort of having to manage production companies that didn't know how to produce things, but now started to figure out how to produce things. So now we wanted something we didn't have, which put us in a very uncomfortable spot in development for a few years.
It's interesting with the production companies because they were sort of competing with the networks at that time, I guess, as well, it sounds like. So there was a lot of pressure to create a hit. Always.
Yeah, there's
um
never been a lack of that pressure, right? It just I don't think anybody like sat on their laurels at any point and said, when MTV started getting hits, that would be the time to just be like, we're the coolest, like, relax, nobody's ever going to catch us. And we didn't, and everybody caught us. So then it just became this explosion of reality TV. Explosion. The Housewives came out of that era. All of the how low can you go? It started happening. Lowest hanging fruit, and who was willing to go there, not willing to go there. So there was a lot of debate on, how important a rating was, as opposed to how much integrity you had either as a network or a producer, and how willing you were to expose people at that point and in doing things that they normally wouldn't do with a camera on them, right? So now we're talking like 2005. That's a second generation of people who learned from what works on reality TV. So you had to produce people who knew better and knew if I just started this fight or flipped this table or, pulled this tablecloth out from somebody, I was going to get more eyeballs. And then it became a monster of its own, and it was fighting against that, finding those, characters or real people to tell real stories. But nobody wanted that anymore. They wanted, that's the birth of the Jersey Shore, right? That's the birth of the Housewives. That's the birth of, like this spectacle that became more about moments than storytelling, and a lot of people used to say, well, it's all in between, and the story leads to those big moments, and it was all kind of bullshit. And you knew it was just sort of going to a point that people were just going to be like, hey, okay, enough already. This is so fake. This is not really what it's at. These people grew up watching these shows, and it's a terrible viewing experience because I can see right through it. But there are some hanger-ons, and then here we are. We're at a place where it's sort of eaten itself up.
Tell us about Busted.
Okay, so Busted was more in that afternoon spot. So two very good friends that were internal MTV producers at some point, and they just came in and they had a terrible tape. So you used to have to come into a room and pitch me and my boss in a conference room and have a tape and sort of talk through your vision of the show. And they came in, and it was a terrible tape. It was just really raw footage of a kid running from a cop, and their pitch was, that's it, it's just like kids on the run. That's what they called it. And we were like, okay. And we were just like, and they were very talented producers. They went on to do like amazing things, and we were just like, that's it. And they were like, yeah. So we walked out of that meeting. My boss walked out of that meeting. She said, that was the worst pitch meeting I've ever been in my life, but there's something there. Like, talk to them. So I called them and I said, what is it? And they said, I don't know. It's kids on the run. It's kids running from cops. Who doesn't want to see kids running from cops? Kids drinking behind a dumpster, and a cop finds them. So I was like, well, it's really cops for kids, right? So why don't you just can you embed with different companies across the country, and we'll just figure out how much good stuff we can get. I don't know how Cops is made, but let's figure it out. And they put together a great pilot. So they dealt with like 3 cities. I think it was Culver County, Maryland, somewhere in Ohio, and somewhere in California. And they embedded, and they spent a lot of money of their own to sort of come up with this pilot. But it like, the essence was, who's not going to watch this at 4:00 on a Tuesday? Like, it was just gripping. More so, instead of just cops and the raw stuff or the edited stuff, it was a little bit of a story before, a little bit of a story after. It's like, it was almost like, we used to make cinematic references to everything that we did because our boss was a very cinematic person. So it was like, I forget that movie where everything was sort of, it wasn't Memento, it was the other one, where things were just edited really quickly. It was a drug movie. Yeah. So it was
Are you
just
sure
like
it's not Memento? Because
no, was
it was the pipe,
yeah.
the
So it would light up,
crack pipe.
and then it would be like, your pupils would dilate, and then it was like 5 quick shots, and then you were high. Anyway, that was the point of reference for that, and that became Busted. So it became like really just fun and like visual and different. We had to differentiate it from Cops in some kind of way, but we did it. We did it for 1 season, and just to give you a reference, it would get probably about 2 million eyeballs in a half an hour on a Thursday at 4:00. Right. So today
Terrific.
those standards are like, what? Like, that doesn't happen anymore. So we did 1 season of it. And it was a huge success. They wanted to bring back season 2. And in between season 1 and season 2 of shows, we used to be our own promotions department, right? So we would think about specials in how to promote a season 2 of a series, and that was your job as an EP from the network, to sort of figure out how you could promote season 2. And usually it ended up being like a special with a, you would book a star, or it would have a performance. It would be just sort of something that was 2 hours of saying, watch this on Monday, watch this on Monday, watch this on Monday. Right. So that came through fruition, and my boss said, hey, we need a special to promote season 2 of Busted. And he said he goes, George, it could be easily just a countdown of the best moments, and just get one of the VJs to sort of toss to it and maybe bring on a guest or whatever, and have a performance. But it had to be used by the studio, which at the time we had our own studio that TRL was using all the time, and sort of that was tapering off. Still had to pay for it. So everybody wanted to use the studio. So we did. And he said, it just has to be in the studio. Don't stress about it. At that point, I started stressing. I always stressed because I had to go to a meeting. I think it was on a Monday, and this was a Friday. And I had to go into a meeting, which was in this very big, large, intimidating conference room with all the executives, top executives from every department: marketing, press, programming, news, us, everybody. It was like, the heads, all heads. And my boss said I had to walk in there and pitch an idea. So I actually, at the time, went across the street because I didn't know cops really that well. So I said, well, maybe I'll just watch enough cops and something will sink into my psyche in some kind of way. So I literally, I went across, I bought the box set. I think it was in season 2 or something like that. Yeah, across the street. I walked in and I bought DVDs and walked back to my office and put them on and sat in my office. That was my day job right then and there. I just locked my door. I told my assistant, don't bother me. And I watched, 30 episodes of cops. Nothing sank in. I had no idea what to do. I was like starting from ground zero. I was like, this is insane. I don't know what to do. And then I started stressing, and it was like Friday at like 5:00. And then I put in the last DVD, and it was actually The Making of Cops, which is a really interesting just exercise and development in its own, because I never knew anything about cops. I never knew how it started. I never knew anything about it. And they went on to tell a story about a Fox executive fell in love with Geraldo Rivera, who was basically a talk show host in the late 80s, early 90s. He did a bunch of stuff about, all of it, from like, you're divorcing your ex and yeah, it's actually your sister, like those type of like terrible stories. But every once in a while, he came from a very deep journalistic background, and he would do, like, on a Thursday, he would embed with like the Miami County, narcotics department on a bust, like that was happening live. And everybody was like, what's going on? You're going from sleeping with your sister to busting real criminals in Miami at 3:00 in the afternoon live. They were like, this is insane. So the executives from Fox said, we love this. We just want to not see all the live stuff. We were like, enough of this like waiting around bullshit. We don't want to see it. So they developed cops from that, and I guess Langley came in at some point and figured out how to do it, and it became a long running hit, right? So me on a Sunday having to go into a meeting with these top executives on a Monday, watch that again and again and again. And I said, what if we reverse it? What if we say we're a tape show? Like, what if we go live? Like on a Saturday night in 3 college towns and just kind of figure it out. And they were like, I went into the meeting, I told that story, and I said, I'm going to reverse engineer it. And the special is going to be 3 hours. We're going to have the studio as the headquarters. We're going to be live in 3 different college towns. And we're, basically at this point, we're going to have pre-taped packages that sort of can fill the time if all the live stuff sucks. But so my hope is we're going to go 25% live, 75% pre-taped, and we'll be in the studio and we'll have control over how we quarterback that. We go to we toss to a tape if it's a boring moment, or if we toss to a live moment if we're lucky to get one. So we did it, and we rehearsed it twice, and it was a complete mess. It was like absolutely a mess. And it was really expensive because production wise at that time, in order to go live in particular areas, you had to have a helicopter flying above with a satellite dish on it that was a repeater, right? And it would send the signal back to the studio. So logistically, this was insane, but this was the MTV mentality, right? Like we were just going to make it happen. It was just going to happen. And it did. And we ended up, I was in the control room the entire time, calling the shots as a producer right behind the director. We ended up going 80% live and 20% pre-taped. We didn't use any of the pre-produced packages that we spent 3 weeks wanting to use, because everything we went to was such a complete surprise to everybody. We caught stuff like teenagers drinking live. We busted a frat party. We did a traffic stop that there was an accident involved, and it was absolutely like you couldn't turn away. It was incredible stuff. We actually pulled up at a fraternity house. We knocked on the door. Kid opened the door. We walked in with our cameras. They were watching the show behind us. Like our camera walked up. Their backs were to us. The screen was them on camera, and they turned around and saw us there.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a pretty meta moment, right?
They were like, what's going on right now? We're like, you're busted. And they all had beers in their hands. They all got tickets. It was incredible. It was absolutely the funnest experience. I told Jen this in our pre-interview, but Ben Silverman, who was the head of NBC at the time, it was probably it aired from I think from like 9 to midnight on a Saturday, and he called the control room to ask to speak with me, and I picked up the phone, and he goes, George, you gotta stop. He was friends with my boss at the time, and he goes, you gotta stop. And I said, why? And he goes, the entire cast of Saturday Night Live is glued to this show, and I can't get them to be on stage right now because they want to know what's going to happen next. And he goes, I'm only kidding. This is like the greatest thing I've ever seen. Like, keep it up. And we all you both of you as producers, when you get through an experience that is like a tall mountain to get to, and you actually get to the summit and everybody collectively cheers. Like it was like we just won the Super Bowl. It was like the greatest thing, from directors to stage managers to people in the field, to everybody just felt the energy of sort of what we were doing.
When you have those moments, you're creating a hit, or it's a good moment, like everyone just gets that vibe, like you get the tingles and all the things, because you're like, this is just gonna work, like the people are gonna react to it, and that's such a great feeling. But my producer brain is like, wait a second, how did they get releases for appearance releases for minors? Because Sean and I have been through hell with
Yeah.
releases and jail, and people that are not incarcerated and all that. So how did you get around releases for minors?
So it was a long period of time that we had to meet with legal, and to figure out how we were going to do everything. And it was just basically like, I think I remember it was a long time ago. I think 2008 it premiered. Um, but the general guidelines were, if you were in a public place, nobody had any expectations of privacy. So you could shoot anything you wanted to. You didn't need a release. You were on public property. You were allowed to record anything you wanted to. You could broadcast it anywhere you wanted. And that was a weird little loophole that allowed us to do everything that we wanted. Plus, there was something that you had the permission of the police department. So like, it was them shouldering this, which I don't think that was a legal thing, but it was harder for people to sue because they had acknowledged that this was okay. And then the third part of it, I forget what it was, that we just had to be only on a shot. It was like under like a weird fair use kind of thing, that we could only be on a certain shot for a certain amount of time. And that prevented us from blurring, which normally we'd have to blur people out who didn't give us permission. So I don't know. There was a lot of legal things that were going on. Plus, it was live. So it was never to be aired ever again. That was another thing that you can never, ever do. Then the other thing was that, if they were protected in the sense that if anybody came back, that we were ready to deal with it, whether or not we're gonna have to pay somebody out, or do something in that sense. I forget what all of those things, but it was like a whole sheet of like how this could actually be legal to do. Um, and basically, I think the main thing was that it was only airing once, and nobody was ever going to see it again. And if you had to air it again, then you would have to get a release.
It's interesting that MTV would put all those resources into a show that you can only see once, that you can't rerun and make money again and again and again off of it. So that was it with Busted. There was no reruns.
Nope, never again. It was never seen again. And in the future, like if you try and look for it, you can't find it anywhere. I've never seen it. So
I did try and find it. I did, in prepping for this, I did try and find it. There's like I think there was like a trailer I found,
okay.
a tiny little like trailer, but that was it.
I wonder too how many laws have been changed just due to all the stuff that MTV did back in the day. Just that kind of thing. Like different states with one party, two party, all the different things that they do. You've probably been responsible for some of these states changing their laws.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at TRL back in the day, and just being live in Times Square all the time, and all the people that were outside. There was no way to get releases from all of those people, and we were outside talking to them, and you were lucky to get a release after the fact, right? So, like, there was a lot of things that were evolving, and I was very close with the legal team all the time in every single thing. Like, as developing a pilot as an executive myself, if I wasn't trying to push or break a law, I wasn't doing my job.
I mean, Sean and I, know firsthand what it's like, to film these jail shows and law enforcement shows. Like, I had meetings with the lawyers every single day. We reviewed every single scene. Everything was, this is like a year ago, so 2024. The laws and the rules have changed quite a bit, and not only did we filmed in jail, so these are people that are not adjudicated. They're arrested for a crime. They're not, guilty of a crime. And so it's a very gray area that these people are in. And so we had to get not one, but three releases for people that were intoxicated. And a couple people slipped through the cracks, and Sean had to like go down to the river and find some of the people that we filmed in jail the night before. And he's going through homeless camps and like, hey, is that who is that guy you were looking for?
It was crazy. Like, all the police officers were like, you should have never done that, man. That was stupid and dangerous. But it was great. I mean, yeah, going down to the river to the homeless camps, like I'd sit there and look at some of the footage and figure out where they said they basically set up camp, and go chase them down, and I need to get this release from you, and they're more than happy to sign. But yeah, it was pretty hairy.
Yeah, people figured out a way to sue, right? So then it just became at the point that I was probably, in, people were like just happy to be on TV, like throw them a t-shirt and a bottle of water, and they're willing to do anything at all, like if MTV was there, so that was part of it too, was sort of like that brand behind you sort of opened a ton of doors to be able to do stupid shit. And then things changed, right? So Jackass came along, and then it became a whole weird thing like that, shut down a lot of things legally, like what we're able to do and what we couldn't do, and they had a whole legal team, and then it really kind of hampered a lot of things, and obviously, like, for all good reasons, right? Like, it was all about safety and all about protecting people and not exposing people in bad ways. So like that, we became sort of like a calmer and simpler network in the sense, because we couldn't work around a lot of those things eventually. So it was gonna happen eventually. We just were able to push it as long as we could, um for whatever our benefit, not for anybody else's.
And at the time that Busted, you did this live segment of Busted that went really well. At that time, personally, you were going through changes as well. Is that right? The time frame, you married Lynn, and you guys were pregnant with your son Ryan. So your family starting to take a different format at that point, right? Is that around the
Right.
same time?
Yeah, like at that time, as I alluded to, everything was sort of changing. It was harder to sort of find that number one hit. It was sort of, like our job was, there was a lot of scrutiny, therefore, and a lot of people were looking other places. So at that point, it was like there's the buying side, which was the network, and that was deemed as sort of the more stable job. And then there was the selling side, which was the production company that were taking the big risks and having one idea that could go to 5 networks instead of just one idea to one network. So there was sort of more opportunity on the selling side at this point. And I had done my run at MTV with production companies and made them an enormous amount of money. I mean, like, just the fact that they got a season 2 meant that they were flush for a full year. And that they were buying new houses and that they were buying second houses. So, it sort of became unfair for me as a creative and saying, why am I making these companies this amount of money when I can sort of, maybe go to the other side and use my powers for good instead of evil, right? Instead of telling people, no, we can't do this. That's what the buying side was. No, 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 right? Myriad in negativity. And the selling side was like, well, what if we change it and we can do this and we can do that? And what if we have this crazy idea? And so that became more like kind of attractive for me as a creative, and sort of to say, hey, let me move to this side and there'll be more opportunities. And I did that. And I think what Jen is alluding to, we had a conversation that my wife was at Nickelodeon at the time and I was at MTV at the time. And we were both lucky to have a steady salary, um, steady benefits. We were just starting a family. We had just bought a house. So, we really had to look at the next 5 years and say, hey, you know what? Like, if I'm going to go to this selling side, which was more risky, it didn't come with benefits. It didn't come with a straight salary. It was basically more commission based, meaning if you sell something, you get money. There was a small salary. I had to take a 50% cut in pay in order to get my first opportunity on the other side. But I had to have a very, come to Jesus conversation with my wife and say, you're steady, you have the benefits, you're, about to start a family. So I'm about to take a huge risk. And maybe I could always come back, but I think if I'm going over here, I'm staying over there. And this was a huge risk, but like a huge reward, right? So I was basically betting on myself and saying that I could do this better than anybody else and I can find that hit and I'm gonna do it. And my wife, was very understanding in that sense and said, yeah, I have the steady, I have the benefits, we're starting a family. The worst case scenario is that you come back to the side after you fail, but I don't think you will. So that's how I made the transition to the other side.
Yeah, no, I love it. You were just saying, you have this serious conversation with your wife, and you can't just run around the world and be a freelance, MTV person with a kid on the way. Like, you have to start thinking about things in a different way. And I think, everybody in production who's daring to have kids, it's a tough occupation to have kids in. So those conversations are important. Like, what are we gonna do?
Yeah. Especially when now your kids are grown up and they don't know what MTV is at all. And
Isn't
I'm
that
like,
crazy? That
you
is the
crazy?
craziest thing ever. I mean, does that generation even know what a music video is? Yeah, it's kind of wild, isn't it? We grew up on that stuff, and it's like it's gone.
I have an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. You'll catch one of them. Like, I listen to Sirius, and the Spectrum is my station, and it'll play. Their format is old and new. And when they play an old, like, I'll catch my 11-year-old singing like a stick song. And I'm like, what's that about? And he's like, oh, dude, this is on TikTok. It's everywhere. I was like, what? It's shocking. So, that's where it goes. I'll freak my kids out every once in a while and they'll like find somebody that they like Eminem you bring up, and I'll show them his phone number in my phone. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I could call him right now. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, you don't know what's in this phone, bro. There's a lot in here.
They have no idea how cool you are, George.
Oh,
No
yeah,
idea.
I know.
No
All goes to
idea.
my first job ever. So
um, so you switched to selling, bold move. And what's happening with production companies at this point? Like, what's going on? It's the height of cable. What's going on with production companies?
So it's probably 2011. I think the heyday of production companies, I mean, I would say was probably 2008. That's where they were all, second, third, fourth, getting 50 episode orders on certain things like, Jen, what was that show? The one where you switched couples. They would switch.
Was it Wife Swap?
Swap.
Yeah, wife swap. So it was like companies would have those. They would have wipe swap. They would wife swap. They would have cash cab. They would have American Pickers. They would have Pawn Stars. Order of shows and an endless order of like work. Like they could not keep up with. So my transition to the selling side was at a small company called Gigantic, and they were doing a bunch of MTV stuff. So it was an easy transition for me. I sort of like now had to talk to a network executive who I was just a network executive, but I was speaking to friends, right? So I was able to sort of like bridge that gap. Again, I was going through huge transitions in my life. My son was born. I just moved into a house. I had a new job. I just bought a car for the first time. I just bought a dog. Like everything was sort of happening all at the same time, for me personally. But and I was getting paid half the amount that I was from the network at best, and I was just betting on myself. And when you transition to those things, everything is your idea, right? Like your idea has to get out the door. It has to be heard. It has to be developed. It has to be sort of listened to. Like your job was to get as many networks to lean in as possible and in a very short amount of time, right? So like you had a year contract and you had to sell 3 shows. So that meant that you were talking to network executives probably 15, 16 times a week, and maybe the same ones, and kind of talking about the same idea or maybe a different idea, and adapting that idea and like saying, well, what if we put this talent to this idea and that talent to that idea? And it was a hamster wheel that kept going around and around and around until something clicked. But it was always a ticking clock for me because now I had to earn, right? So and part of the process is that when you are a part of a company now that's not yours, they had the right to say whether or not they wanted an idea pitched or not pitched. So you would spend enormous amount of times and know that this idea was good, and then face, the owner of a company and saying, I don't like that idea. And you're like, well, okay. So you couldn't pitch that idea, right? So you'd have to just be on this constant treadmill of like, what about this? What about that? Getting it outside of that person, getting it to a network, then getting it to a network who would bring it to their boss, who would bring it to their boss, who would go into a green light meeting, who would go into that green light meeting. So it was just a constant struggle. And you would have an idea that you would come up with on a Wednesday, but you would have an idea that was like 4 weeks baked. Then you would have an idea that was 8 weeks baked. Then you would have another idea that was like going into a green light meeting and you're about to hear a green light for a series. So that would be a Wednesday for you. Like it'd be a new idea, a half baked idea, a 3/4 baked idea, and an idea that was just about ready to go. And then Thursday came around, and that was another new idea and another half baked. So it was just this constant circle of ideas and a refresh and where the ideas came from and where they were going and how they were going to be put out and what was the next big thing, and constant no's, right? Like no, 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 right? So 80% of anything that you did, even in that cycle of a Wednesday, 80% of it was gone by Thursday. And it was just it was a hard struggle, especially with having like new life on my my one side, which I had a new family, a new house, a new dog, a new car, a new everything, and it was just like stay positive. And then my job was to like kind of wade in negativity all day long.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard, like, nobody knows what's gonna make a hit. You just have to keep throwing spaghetti at the wall and hope something sticks. And that was kind of like, what were people looking for at that point?
So at that point, it was just everybody was chasing, right? So whatever was the top hit, every network would say, give me what you did for them, but give it for us, right? So my trajectory was that I realized that production companies were all different. They were all built in different ways. Some had the mindset of, yes, we're a development company and a production company. Some we're just a production company and we don't believe in development. Others we're all just development. So, and that mattered where they spent their money, right? So in development, you need to have money in order to spend, right? So you have to generate materials. You have to meet talented producers. You need to sort of get great ideas, in the house and sort of like figure out how to do that. And that takes time and it takes money. And certain production companies were like, why am I spending money when I'm making a hit show right now? And they were like, well, my job was, well, what happens when that hit show goes away? Don't you want another one? And it's a numbers game. So, and certain companies understood that, certain companies didn't. So my struggle was sort of like figuring out who understood development and who understood the game and who really kind of was all in um, about it, because most of my job is 80% fail, right? So why are you going to hire me that I'm 80% a failure? It's like buying a car, right? You drive it off the lot and it like depreciates by 80% as soon as you drive it off the lot. That's a development executive. Like they have the potential to turn your Kia into a Porsche, but most of the time your Kia is going to be sold for $500 at the end of 2-year lease.
Production companies are trying to figure out who they are and what their objective is. The business is changing, the landscape is changing. So everyone's trying to figure this out. And you're in the middle of this sort of hopscotching between companies to try and find the right fit. And on a lot of people on your resume, that doesn't look good. Like you bop around. Who are you? You're not loyal. You're not a good employee, that kind of thing. But in our business, it is the norm because not it's not one size fits all. One company isn't doing this particular way, and does that work with your skill sets? Like it's this endless sort of puzzle to figure out. And I love what if you could elaborate on that, because you and Sean and I, we've all worked for hundreds of companies in the course of our career. Does that make us bad employees? No, we're actually incredibly adaptable and skilled and can jump in any kind of environment. It's just sort of like, is this the right lineup for the direction you want to go and a good fit for you and that kind of thing. And it sounds like there's a lot of sorting that out.
Yeah, it was always really having an answer for why it didn't work out the last time. And for me it was I was evolving and I said, listen, I'm a network guy, but I can produce stuff. So like I've learned that like there's a certain level of what you need in order to actually make me succeed. So my conversations prior to like even the first or second companies were more real because I had nothing to lose. I was like, if you don't have this A, B, or C in place, then don't even hire me and don't hire anybody who you're considering because A, B, or C helps me succeed and helps you succeed. So I was able to have those real conversations with people based on experience from both the network side of things and sort of my limited world in sales at that point, which really helped me define what was a better fit for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. And you landed at Big Fish.
Yes. So I landed there with a lot of those frank conversations about, sort of like their expectations versus where the market was at the time, and what I had learned in production houses is that I'm not going to come in and tell you this is my strength and this is where I'm going to go and where I need to go. I'm going to lean into your strength and sort of help develop out of that because, you're known for something. There's something, you have a semi whiff of some success. So there is some kind of magic that's going on there. I need to expose that. That's a third of my objective is sort of to, I now understand what you do well and what the marketplace expects from you. So I need to elevate that. Right. So that was part one. And then part two was I need to sort of understand where we're all headed and be ahead of that curve, right? So I'm not going to chase it. I'm never going to chase it. My chasing of the network is within what you do well. I will chase it there. I want to be ahead of anything that anybody else is doing. That's part two. And then part three is to learn from our successes and not our failures. So just go ahead with what worked and make it better and keep making it better. So whether or not that was a pilot that was like deemed a success for all of us that got passed on, let's make it better. How do we make it better? How do we improve on our successes? Forget about our failures, right? So it was a 3-part process and it was a very frank conversation. And I said, I need money to do that. And I don't care if you don't pay me, but you're going to have to put money into this. And this company was willing to do that. They said, this was our budget last year. This is our budget this year. This is all of that stuff. And they're like, we like the middle. We want to take those chances. And I said, okay, I'll come up with like insane ideas that we can like kind of figure out, but I'm never going to chase anything. So it worked well for a few years. Honestly, like there was a lot of pressure for that company to sort of get going. They had one hit at that point. They had a show called Bomb Patrol, and they did a really cool thing. They had to go through like an enormous amount of red tape in order to kind of film in a war zone, basically, and with all of these guys who, detonated bombs in Afghanistan, and they did it with fixed rig cameras, right? So before, that was like a big thing. They actually figured out how to do that, and it was technically like a win for them because they got it all done. It was a hit season, and then season 2 went away because, the government cracked down at that point. But what was smart about them is they took sort of that technology and applied it to a reality show. So they did Black Ink Crew, which was a tattoo parlor in Harlem. And they sort of did that whole fixed rig thing. They put cameras everywhere and captured these very candid conversations and then added another level to sort of an ensemble weird reality show. And they became known for that. So we sort of like dove into that a little bit and did a bunch of different shows, pilots and things along those lines. We did other things that were out of the box. And it was just a really great place to be because you walk in and and any idea was really a good one for a while, which all leads us to Live PD, right? So we had done a season of a show called Surviving Marriage, which was a great show. It was like couples who were going through therapy and they were on the brink of divorce, and you threw them in, survival type situations, right? So, and then all the situations were sort of constructed by a marriage therapist and a survival expert, right? So if you had to build, you had to build a structure, it meant something about your relationship, right? Like it
Who
was
signs
meant.
up for a show when they're on the brink of divorce?
Oh, I mean, you would be amazed, like a million people, right? So that was personally my favorite development moment, because I had just come into Big Fish at the time, and they were just putting together a rip reel, right? So a rip reel is just an editor sitting in a room, graphics, and sort of trying to explain the concept of the show and throwing footage from existing shows like Survivor and all the other kind of rip-off shows at the time. And I looked at the reel and I went, it was halfway done. And I had asked them, I said, how much are you spending on this reel? And they said, I guess it's just the editor, the editor's time, and he'll take 2 weeks. And at that time, it added up to maybe like $6,000 or something like that, a weekly rate for an editor. And I said, can I have that money? And he said, what are you going to do with it? And I said, well, I just want the $6,000. Can I pitch you how I would spend that $6,000 and how to develop this show? And he said, sure. So I took, 1,500 was $3,000 and then another grand. So 4,000. I gave 1,500 to a marriage therapist, and I gave 1,500 to a showrunner in the survival space. And I invited them both to our office to spend a week together. And I basically put them in a conference room, and I'm not kidding. I fed them, but I didn't let them leave. And I said, there's tenants in both of your expertise that match up. I need them to align. I need you to say, this is the first step of getting into a better relationship. This is the second step into improving your relationship. This is your third step. I go, this is the first step to surviving 30 days in the wild. This is your second step to surviving 45 days in the wild. This is your third step. I go, they're very similar, and I need to show that. And
Just survival in the wilderness.
exactly. So they both took a week, and they came out, and they had what we called was a ladder of how they both aligned. And we went into A&E without any tape, and that was our pitch. I said, I took these two experts. I don't know anything about it, and this is what they came up with. And I just showed them. It was 3 pages, and A&E went right to series on it. And they were like, that's the greatest experiment of like how to develop an actual show. Like, I can see it. I can see what you don't have to pitch every episode. You don't have to pitch who the host is. You don't have to pitch teases. You don't have to pitch all the bullshit. Like, it's all right there. And every episode will be that A to Z. And, that went to series, and it was great. And it was an awesome show. It was clunky. There was a lot to work out, and, it was an experiment, but it was really great. So I was there at Big Fish for about 3 months at that point. So I got a series like greenlit after 3 months, which was kind of a huge accomplishment at that time, honestly, when productions were weaning a little bit. So all that to be said, we had a weekly call with a development executive, and every week it was like synergistic. Like, that was the greatest thing about production companies and and networks is just to mind meld. It wasn't understanding that you were two different sides. It was like you were both on the same side. You were both trying to get to the same place. And it was just so fluid within development of that series, that we kept the call. Even when the series went dark and we were waiting for a season 2. So it
was with Sean Gottlieb at
Sean
A&E.
Gottlieb, yep, who is like the man in charge there now, and well deserved. And he was, I think, director level at that point, and just a great mind meld, and more so that it was very conversational. So we were all had new families, so it was about, what did your kid do today that pissed you off, or what was the Red Sox score last night, and it was really, and that would be a half hour of our day. And if anything TV came out, fine. If it didn't, who cares, right? So we had those all the time, and they were very helpful, because he would share what meeting he just came out of and who was whispering this or who wanted that. And then we were saying, well, we're sort of kind of developing this, but it's early stages. I mean, it's like, oh, I'd like to take a look at that when you figure it out. So it was just this ongoing, like, cool collaboration. There weren't a lot of people who were open to that sort of, it's actually vulnerability, right? So that's where I think where most ideas can germinate from, is vulnerability. And like, if you have the environment to sort of be vulnerable, in a sense, like, you can talk through sort of how things can sort of, and our industry, there's a lot of ego, right? So it's a lot of like, there's not a lot of people that can sit in a room and be like, I don't know what the idea is. Like, you figure, you need to have the answer and have the format and have the talent. And there's not a lot of people that can sort of shrug their shoulders and say, hey, what about this? This is kind of weird. Like, I don't know what it is, but I found a lot of success in that. I really did. I found a lot of points where, if I didn't have all the answers, that was kind of, I was on to something, right? Like, the people who have all the answers, not so much are on to anything. But that's not to be said. Like, I'm sure American Idol was like buttoned up. Everybody knew exactly what that show was, right? Like, from the beginning, and in the format world. But like, when you're sort of like kicking stuff around, it's really fun to have that environment of vulnerability, and that's really rare for executives from a network, the buying side, and executives from the selling side, to be that vulnerable. But we had that atmosphere, yeah, which was great. And then, of course, what spun out of that was, he came out of a meeting and said, at the end of talking about our kids and the Red Sox and how bad the Yankees were and all that stuff, he'd be like, oh, by the way, I came out of this meeting, they're looking for some kind of live stunt to do on a weekend, in like 3 weeks, if you guys have any ideas. And we were like, don't go anywhere. And he's like, wait, I gotta run. And we were like, no, we're like, yeah, I did a little show at MTV. It was called Busted Live. It's live cops. And he went, what? And I said, it was live cops. And he said, interesting. And then he walked away from that meeting. We didn't hear from him. He canceled our next weekly. And then the next weekly, he came on with his boss, and who was a friend of all of ours, and Shelley Tatro. Shelley Tatro. And she said, what do you, she's very, if you don't know Shelley, she's the greatest born and bred, like old school. I've known her for 20 years, right from the gut. She's like, George, the fuck are you talking about? And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, she's like, I need to see the show. Like, you didn't do that. And I said, we did it. I said, Shelley, I'm telling you. She's like, I need to see it. And I was like, I don't know if you want to see it, like, but it can happen. And she's like, it can't happen. This can't happen. There's no way it can happen. There's no way. No way. And I was like, it can. So she said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're good. So she was a friend of Big Fish from VH1 because they had produced Black Ink Crew together, and then was very favored within the Big Fish, world, and very like excited to give them an opportunity. So she said, I'm going to go to bat on this idea. I think you're insane. I think you guys are all insane. And I'll go on record in saying that, but I'm going to get you some development money and we'll figure it out. I said, okay. So at that point, really, from my perspective, that was a win, right? Like I had a foot in the door. I was very happy. I went home. I was like popping champagne bottles. Like I was like, what I didn't know was the trap that we were falling into, right? So networks at this point didn't just say yes and then go to series. They had a series of like kind of hurdles that you sort of had to go through in order to get from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. Every network operated differently. It could be casting, it could be talent, it could be an executive producer, it could be the right director. They're just looking to find reasons to say no to you is basically the bottom line. But you get a small amount of seed money, and they had outlined 3 steps for us that we had to get through. And each stage, they would green light more money. So it was a very little amount of money. I think it was 10 grand for the first stage. Stage 1 was, is this legal? Can we do it? I don't absolutely agree that it is legal. So they gave us $10,000. And at that point, that money was allocated towards us hiring an outside lawyer that they liked to talk to their inside lawyer. And then they sat down for a week and outlined how it was legally possible. And that was everything from being on public ground, from having the approval of certain departments, having this, that, the other thing. There was like a 5-step process. But basically, they came back and they said, yes, this is legal. And everybody in A&E said, you've got to be kidding me. And they said, okay, well, we'll green light stage 2. And stage 2 was access, right? So access was like their easy shutdown because they were like, nobody is ever going to agree with you and sign our template. So legal came out with their template that said, this is how you're going to have to do it. And our mandate, I think they gave us $15,000 at that point, was to get 10 departments on board. And they said, good luck. So we hired somebody in charge of it. And then we hired somebody else and somebody else. So I think Big Fish, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know this, but they might have gone out of pocket in order to sort of get the 10. Which meant that they just had to keep somebody on a little bit longer and they had to pay them themselves. And it didn't all come out of the $15,000. But lo and behold, we came back with 10 signed deals from departments across the country that said, yes, we will allow you to broadcast this live for a 2-hour period with certain language. I wasn't privy to all those details and not a lawyer, but so we got to stage 2. And then stage 3 was the technology of it all, right? So I alluded prior to this that when I did it at MTV, it was helicopters and repeaters. And I think that special cost like over $1 million for like 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever. But now they had to do this. They wanted to do this once a week. So it had to be cost effective. So the one way was, how was the signal? How were we able to have, let's just say, I think at the time we said 6 different departments all at the same time coming back to the studio. We don't have a studio and we don't know how the footage is going to come back. And it's never going to be under $1 million for an episode. So you guys figure that out. So they gave us another 10, 15 grand, whatever it was, we hired a technical director. And that guy's job, Larry, who was amazing, was to figure out the different ways of how this could happen. And what was happening at the time was cellular was a big thing. And then this thing called bonded cellular, which was from this Israeli company that he had found. And he said, dude, they do this. Live View was very popular at the time, and they had a certain bonded cellular. We looked at them, and then this Israeli company, and they said, we can do it. And it's this pack. It's like this big. It's smaller than your cell phone. It goes on the back of a really small camera, and that's it. And the signal comes into the studio. So we figured out that
You got
cost
Israeli intelligence on
yeah,
your
exactly. Like insane. And that cost next to nothing, literally nothing. And they were like, this is insane. Like, I don't understand it. So we got to our 4th meeting with the network, and it was with Rob Chernow, who, was a small group of people, Shelly, Sean, myself, Big Fish. And he said, I've been dying to say no to this idea this entire time. And you guys have made it really hard for me to say no to this, because you've checked every box we've asked you to, and there's no reason why this shouldn't happen. And then we got greenlit to 8 episodes.
That's live PD, but you still needed hosts.
Yeah.
But
so
those hurdles, I want to take a sec though and talk about the hurdles, because I think the perception out there is that people come with an idea and it just goes boom, straight to air. And there are so many hurdles to overcome. You're, on the frontier, on a new frontier, and trying to pave new ways. Like, no one's really done this before. Cops was a different beast entirely from a live format. Um, so it's an incredible feat to overcome these obstacles. And on every single production, what did you say? There's like 19 problems every 5 minutes.
yeah.
But that is the game. It's a problem. It's not just creation, it's problem solving. That's And if you can get through the problem solving part, you might end up with a show potentially.
Yeah. And then your other enemy when you're in development is time, right? So that the more time that goes on, this is very simple, but the more life happens, right? So, and with life happening is good for development and unscripted. It's really good because it inspires a lot of different ideas, and there's crazy stories that come from nowhere. But those stories oftentimes can shift a pattern that you have with a show that you like, live PD. We were like on a path, and all of those 3 stages took like months to get through. And through those months, the world was changing. And through those months, everything was changing. Racial barriers were being questioned, cops versus citizens were being changed. Everything, politics were being changed, and that was affecting every path or every hurdle that we had to go through, because was life changing in the right way, that this was the perfect time for this show, or was this an awful time for this show? I mean, oftentimes we face it in a sense, unfortunately, is like there can be somebody that like kind of passes away during the time that you're developing a show, and it changes just the whole mindset of how they, if you're working on a medical show and that person had a brain trauma and you were working on a brain trauma show, that could kill
The
that idea.
network exec leaves the network, and all of a sudden you spent months developing with this person that's no longer even there anymore. That happens all the time. But this was about 2015 at this point.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so you were developing 2015, and then it went to air in 2016.
That sounds right.
So tell us about the host, because that's a huge part of live PD is the studio part and the hosts.
Yes. So we had always visioned it, or, I had always pitched it as the host was the quarterback of it all, right? So he would have, we always pitched it as, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, that actually took over, just started making like a huge push, but it's the NFL Red Zone. So the NFL Red Zone is like one host that sort of is quarterbacking 10 games going on at the same time at 1 o'clock. And then he's quarterbacking 10 games that are going on at 4 o'clock. And the original inception of that format was that you would see every team score. So that would be, you couldn't miss a score. And then eventually it became, you just were going to see a good play, right? So it kind of took over the fantasy mindset of, fans, in the sense that I'm going to see my player score and I'm going to see my points go up and all that stuff. But it was like organized chaos. It was like 10 games, like 100 things going on at one time and bouncing around all over the country. So we sort of said, wow, that's pretty cool. Like, that's what we are. We're more of organized chaos, in the sense that we wanted to have a quarterback in the studio and we wanted to be able to toss to people. And we understood right away that through developing the idea and shooting it a couple different ways, that we didn't want an omniscient voice kind of present. We didn't want somebody on the ground, like a reporter in a regular news type of way, to sort of say, we're here at so-and-so and this is happening and let's check in. Because that was really standard, because we found that, through trial and error, that a lot of these cops were very communicative. They knew what they were doing. They knew how to hold themselves. And it made that like barrier, that news barrier, go away, that you were now over the shoulder of this cop that was pulling up to a car for the first time, and nobody led you to that moment. You just came from the studio, and all the toss was just like, what, we're in Mystic, Connecticut right now. Let's check out what's going on. And you were just over the shoulder of this cop. And it was like this moment of like, neck raising possibilities of what was going to happen. So through trial and error, we figured out that we wanted that quarterback in the studio. We needed a host. We needed a vision. We needed somebody to really be able to, from a live perspective, be able to bounce from one thing to another. They all listen to IFBs, so he, or she needed to figure out that I'm going to go maybe from here to there or there to there. I don't know where it's going, and be comfortable in all of that on camera. So we went right to news, and we came up with a list of people. And I think our last remaining list was 113 people that we pitched to the network. And when I was saying before, like, life happens during the process, there was a lot of racial commentary, like, should this be a black host? Should this be a minority? Should this really be a white person? Like, should it be a female? Should it not be? What, all the same questions you go through on any real show. But what was happening was life was changing, right? Like, there was a lot of turmoil happening within the country and within cops and citizens, and there was a lot of back and forth. So that discussion started to change every day. It was like, oh no, we can't look at any more females. We're not going to deal with that, or we're not going to deal with white men. We're not, all of this stuff. It just was morphing and morphing and morphing. And Dan Abrams, who ended up being the actual host, was the first on all of our lists. And we're like, he's spot on. He's got chops in news, but yet he's approachable. He's got background in law and crime. Like, He had his own network of true crime stuff. Like, he just seemed like the right person. But he was, a buttoned up, middle-aged white man at the time. And that was scary, or it kept being like, is it scary or is it good? Is it better? Is it not better? So after 113 and him being number one, we went all the way back to the top, and they said, Dan is the man. So he came on, and he was the right choice from the very beginning. He understood it. He, as a lawyer himself, could be able to speak to a lot of the stuff like off the cuff. Was a very good talent in the sense of understanding where to go, when to go, how shows work. He was very good, on CNN and a bunch of different networks, so had live experience. So he really checked all the boxes and ended up being the right choice in the end. When we got through the host hurdle, the next hurdle was sort of picking the departments that we wanted to follow, and the race card, to your point, Jen, came into question again because everybody was worried that this couldn't be a show about white cops arresting black people. Like, it just couldn't be. And we had to sort of like adapt to what was going on in the country. We had to adapt to sort of how we were projecting the show. We were sort of saying, are we exploiting? Are we not exploiting? Because it was all live, so we didn't know what was going to happen. So there was a lot of things that sort of had to be in consideration before actually going forward. So at one point, it was like we needed a lot of white police officers. And then I think in the collective mindset of development and sort of like kicking around the idea, whether it came from the network or anybody else, it became the sense of like, well, we didn't, this show's about transparency, right? And we're about projecting what's going on in these little pockets of the country. And we didn't, as a network or as a producer, hire these police officers. So we weren't in charge of sort of, well, we hired a white one instead of a black one. And, we're predominantly like an African American population. So we don't control any of that. So it just fought against the basic mantra of the show, which was transparency, to say that we were going to choose one department over another just based on racial equality or sort of the way that, certain minorities might have been arrested more than in other areas. But that really went against what we were really tasked to do, which was to present all the different options. And like, these are the companies that decided, or departments that decided to be a part of this experiment with us. So let's go along for the ride. So that was this level of like, I don't know, this like educational, like self-aware, smart, um, kind of sense of like TV that I've never experienced before. And I was like, I was very grateful to be a part of that conversation, to where it was like, it was really about being honest.
You're not the department head. You're not deciding who's hired and who's not, and who's getting arrested and who's not. Your job is to show up and show that what's going on. And by showing what's going on, people understand what's going on. So whether it looks unfair or unequal or this or that or whatever, by showing and seeing, you understand it. And that's ultimately beneficial to everybody, because then you can course correct. You can't course correct if you're uninformed or you don't know what's happening. But when you see what's happening, then you can course correct. And I think that's the beauty of the whole show. And just it's really interesting that they were able to take the chance and just embrace the environment they were in for what it is, and simply show what it is. And that's probably why, I'm guessing, partly why it's become a hit, because it is what it is. And I think that there's a, that transparency, that like realness, you're in the moment, you're not, trying to make it something it isn't, is refreshing to folks, I would imagine.
You don't decide who comes through those doors. That's you're just a fly on the wall. You're just there to be a fly on the wall and just share that experience and go through that journey with the incarcerated person or the officers.
If you start interjecting in that world, then you're changing the conversation, right? So it's like it's not your job. Like there's a very fine line between production or our produced shows versus what news does, right? So, and even news kind of like goes over that line every once in a while and kind of takes over the conversation. So I think within this world, it was like, let's not, the conversation is happening right now. Like it's on Twitter, like people, like departments are on Instagram live right now. Like the media is like taking control of sort of pushing this agenda out there. Like, let's just follow the conversation and let's not be a part of it. And that's really hard when we're collectively, all of us as producers are asked for results, right? Because like then you're asked to change the conversation and sort of interject yourself and create the conversation. And this was like it was a social juggernaut at this point. So our job really, or the show's job, was just to follow that conversation and not create it and just really document it and not be a part of it.
It's something that it's a really important point, because something that I have found extremely refreshing about filming law enforcement type of stuff is that you are in their world. They have a real job to do, and you are simply allowed to follow them do their job. So you have this very special access to get to these places, to be privileged in these sort of worlds. What I call, high level access, and you have to respect the job that they need to do and not get in the way or interfere or anything like that. So in a way, the pressure was off as a producer, because you simply were limited. You couldn't tell an officer to go do this or go do that, or I need a better shot, or the light looks better over there. Can you say that again and make it more clear? We couldn't do that. You had to just plug in and do your best to capture the action. And I think in that sense, the viewer is forgivable, and that the content rules over the quality, because you're not always going to have the best quality. You're not going to have the best sound bites, the best lighting, the best angle, or all those things that we do and all these other shows. You're just going to get the scene and the rawness of it. And I think the viewer has learned to just accept that and enjoy that, rather it trying to be perfect. And so as a producer, I found that very refreshing, to just step back and let it happen, and you're there to observe. And hopefully, real life is interesting enough. And in live PD it certainly is. It's never boring.
Funny thing is just back to the development process, because we went and we did probably about 4 or 6 real run-throughs so we had our crews in place, we tested everything, we had a technical run-through, we had then another run-through with the quarterbacks in the studio and sort of how we're going to bounce around, whether we're going to have people narrate during, and then we kind of pulled that back, and we had the luxury of sort of doing it live a few times that wasn't for air, and sort of worked through all those problems. So the kinks were sort of like kind of working themselves through, but like we understood that the kinks were the best part about the show, right? Like the bumps, the camera bumps, the movements, I don't know what's going on, like just all of that added to the chaos of the live experience. And sort of to get it's almost like how to not overproduce a show 101, which is really hard for probably the three of us to wrap our heads around, because it's really about just don't worry about it. However, there was that, but like the real question from the top down, and the things that used to keep us up at night all the time was like, what if nothing happens? Like, that was the constant. It was, what if nothing happens? What if nothing happens? And I was the only one who had the experience of actually doing this show before. And all I kept saying was, you will be surprised at how much actually does happen. And you will be shocked. And of course, the first two run throughs, nothing happened. And it was because there was a lot of things that they were, the production was very guarded about. They were like, don't follow this. Or, there was lawyers in the control room. There was tons of people saying what to do, what not to do. But when it all came down, everybody just sort of had to take a step back and say, we all have the safety net. We got to let this happen. Otherwise, we're going to be controlling the uncontrollable, and that'll be very transparent to everybody watching. So we worked very hard in figuring out the safety net. We worked very hard in sort of technically how to bounce things around. We've all exercised our production muscles on how to like kind of really control this beast, but we just got to let the beast become the beast. And that's what eventually it worked itself through, right? And then more stuff started to happen, and we were able to sort of be in certain areas that we were uncomfortable with being before. And then we managed to sort of like piggyback or checkerboard different sort of agencies. Like, this one sort of can do this and this one can do that. And we were able to identify how we could get results by just sort of knowing, and it was as it was growing. And and that's how it became to grow more and more and more, is because everybody was really adaptable and sort of understanding that you're really not in control. And the more we sort of say we're not in control, the better off everything is. And it actually means not to be in control. And that was really hard. I mean, you're talking about people at heads of networks that are like not in control, who have made their careers on being in control.
Your success was because you just let it be out of control. I love that. But there's a control, not control. Like, you had your bumpers, you just had to, stay in the lane and you were fine. But that's, honestly, that's what risk is. And we are in the business of risk taking all these new ideas, every new show. Who knows what's going to happen with it? We're dealing with real people and real life situations. You never know what's going to happen. And so you're always taking a chance. It's very risky. But those are the best kind of risk, is when you have, you understand the parameters. There are bumpers, but you're willing to take that risk. It's called, basically, it's calculated risk.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Sure.
not a
Yeah.
dumb risk. It's a calculated risk.
Yeah. And there was less and less of that happening throughout, from 2000, the heyday, to, I guess, 2015. Like, within those 15 years, there were less calculated risks that people were willing to take. I mean, and it all comes down to like, these enormous lawsuits like TLC and the Duggars, and a lot of these things that now a hit show becomes sort of a punchline because of the risks that weren't sort of like, there were no bumpers, or somebody like forgot one of those bumpers, right? So you don't want to be the butt of that joke, but yet, and then I think that the pendulum started to shift a little bit, right? It just became like this, now we're risk adverse as opposed to risk taking, and I think that
Or the
changed
risks
everything.
are just in different places. Like I
Yeah,
think
sure.
YouTube is a big playground for risk, you know. But getting back to you, because so you guys went to air and immediate success. Like you ranked the number one true crime series and number one series on Friday and Saturday nights across all cable stations. Like the biggest cable show ever in history. I mean, that is unbelievable.
Yeah, so there was, from a business perspective, it was a slow build. The first 8 were a bit slower, but sort of they saw these bumps, um, that made everybody from the, the network perspective sort of lean into. But more so, what had happened over those 8 weeks were that there was this community experience, right? So normally when I did a show in like the 2000s, it had to have with a social, um, kind of part to it, right? So it was like, how would this, if you're producing a show for MTV, how would it live online? Where is it going to go? What's the MTV.com part of it? And it was always an afterthought, right? And then as the 2000s became the 2000s, and even prior to a lot of social media, it wasn't an afterthought. It just became like, okay, well, some ideas can come from this, and look at like what Instagram's doing, and look at what YouTube's doing, and look at what Facebook is sort of like, they're going live. Like, so it sort of became this like kind of mid moment for live PD where it was like, well, this isn't an afterthought. This is how we're going to um, sort of jump social media. We're going to go live. So there's no chance of them kind of trumping us and becoming cooler than us, or actually having something more to say, because we're going to say it first because we're live. So we were like, we didn't necessarily set out the goal to compete and like quash all the other sort of social media worlds, but we ended up doing it. And they were like, we can't keep up. Like, social media was like, we literally can't keep up. It's a train, and we either have to climb on board or we have to not acknowledge it at all. And what had happened was then they had like, social media obviously has a life of its own, right? So communities started. So there were live PD communities that started talking to each other, and memes were happening. And this is my favorite cop, and like, this is insane. And now I have a Facebook group based on one cop, and like, I want to see more of him. So the chatter became like part of the experience. Like, all of a sudden I had talked about from 2000 or 1998 to 2015 all about a shared screen experience in a show, right? Like, how am I going to watch my phone and how am I going to watch TV at the same time? Like, how am I going to do it all? Like, that's what anybody wanted, a shared screen experience. And then live PD came along, and it was like, I can't stop watching, and I can't stop tweeting on my phone. I can't stop answering my friend group on live PD. I'm joined this group. Did you join that group? Oh my God. Did you see Stick? Did you see that guy? Oh my God. That's awesome. People screen grabbing. It was like a pure second screen or multi-screen experience. And people were like, never, ever. We've tried to do this. It just never happened. And it actually happened with it. So the momentum wasn't necessarily with the ratings. It was more, other departments from A&E would come in and go, do you realize what's going on in social media right now? They're like, there's friend groups, there's these people who are, and you would think that it would be all negative. Like, this show sucks. This is racial. This is awful. The state of America. It was all like, this is so real. I feel like I'm a part of this. I'm I'm a part of a community, and finally I can see this stuff for real. I can talk about it. So that's what got it from season 1 to season 2, was sort of this experience of like just being there, and even just texting your friend and being like, dude, you got to turn this on like right now. Like, it became sports finally for reality TV, right? It became a moment that you had to be on your couch, appointment viewing, 9 o'clock on a Friday night. You had to have your phone next to you, and everybody would be like, okay, here we go, and it changed the game in that sense of our world about, oh, okay, now I finally have to be back on the couch at this time, and I have to share this with all my friends. So
It was
yeah,
live sports, but live sports, you're picking fans, you're watching the show, you know? That's incredible. So it was kind of like, not just the show itself, but this multi-platform explosion that that people were responding to. Um, and social media was sort of new-ish at the time too. Like, you couldn't have had that kind of same experience on these early TV shows because social media wasn't really a thing back then, but now it's a thing. Live PDs on Twitter, or like there were PD shows, right? Weren't they departments posting on Twitter? So you've got this synergy between social media and cable, and boom.
it felt like, I can't believe what I'm watching. I don't know why this is legal. I don't know how this is but this is insane, right? And like, I can text you, Jen, right now and be like, are you watching? Like, your favorite cop is on right now. Do you believe him? He's so cute. Like, it's like stuff like that. Stupid. And you couldn't have planned it. You couldn't have even said, like, with this vortex and the way the world is at, and all these people that sit in these rooms about graphs and trends and who's doing what and how we're viewing things, and nobody could have seen that coming. No, it was just an idea, and there's no way that I could have, or was it my job to predict that any of that stuff was going to happen? And I never take credit for that in a million years. It was just, as I said, the collective sense of everybody involved in sort of to move it forward into the area that it was. So it was a happy accident, yes, in a lot of ways, but really it could have become something would have never talked about ever in a million years.
Insane. So what was it like to create a hit like that, to have a show that, that was sort of the biggest thing on cable? Like, what does that feel like?
Well, in one aspect, going back to what we talked about in my conversation to my wife, is that it was just, it was going to happen. I bet on myself. I knew that it was going to be one idea that sort of, rose to the top, and that's really what I was in it for. Besides, the creative environment that we all really have prospered in, and love to be around, and just feed off of, right? But it was just sort of like, part of me was, it's about time, because there were other ideas that I thought in my career could have gone further, and could have been bigger, just based on support of, of a lot of different things, or the environment changing, or whatever it was, a lot of different factors. But and then the other part of it always is like, my job was sort of, and is always, just sort of managing negativity, right? So it's like, I didn't have a chance to enjoy it so much, because I was just waiting for, the bottom to drop out, in a sense, which is, that's just part of what I do. It's just like, okay, what's next? Okay, that's on the air. Like, let's go. Like, that was the mentality of the production company I was at, that was the mentality of, who was in charge of A&E. That was, it was just like, this is good. Well, who knows how long it'll run? That's what we used to say all the time in production meetings. Who knows? Could be the last episode. This could be it. And so there was never this like pop the champagne bottles, like you came up we've all collectively developed the greatest show of all time, and this should have happened a long time ago, and it's great, and we're all good, and pat yourself on the back. And no, it's like, oh, this is gonna be over on Friday night, and Monday we're gonna be like, oh, what do we do now? So my job was to move forward, right? So like the production went ahead, and I was involved in meetings and sort of navigating the live sense of things and sort of workflow and sort of staffing, people like you and other, really talented people from the real access police world, who, were respected within there, knew how to shoot a camera, like those were always on my radar. And it was always an email or 17 a day, like, how do I work on the show? So I was always a part of it, but really it was like, okay, what happens when the bottom drops out? Where are we after that? How many series are we going to have to get on air?
So you just
um
kept moving. So you had this success, but you were kind of like on to the next success thing.
yes, or like, yeah. And
But you rode that out. But you rode the, I mean, but that show was from 2016 to 2018. This was a huge show, the biggest show on cable. You're behind it and you're busy producing the next thing. Um, but I'm sure you felt some sense of pride and, like, hey, we did it. We did create a good show there.
yeah, there were moments. I mean, like, you would finally go to a social party that nobody had anything to do with TV, and they're like, "What do you do?" And you say live PD, and they were like, "I love that show." Right? So there was that you got outside of the bubble, and it was like, "Oh, cool. That's great." And then there was, like 100 questions behind it. But yeah, I guess, I don't know. I think it's the mindset of a development executive, whereas like the minute I got lazy and sort of became this was it, then it was actually gonna be it. So
Well,
I had
then,
to plow forward.
but then the bottom did drop out. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So the production company I was at sort of had a different thing in mind in sort of my trajectory. And I think there were, from my perspective, there were creative differences that were moving forward, and sort of, I don't know, I guess personality problems, in the sense that I guess it became such a monster, that it took on a whole different profile for the company, right? So then it became everybody wanted their live show. So A&E asked for another one, and Lifetime asked for theirs, and Animal Planet asked for theirs, right? Everybody came out of the woodwork, and it just it
But,
grew. I guess there's something to be said about growing pains, and I'll just chalk it to that, with that company that grew too big too fast. And sort of like, I had a different idea in mind in where things were going, right? So I had sort of pitched the idea that, like, I take a step back from development and sort of like try to create a different department, because I saw all the sort of bells and whistles and the signs on the wall that said that this wasn't going to last in our world. So I had asked to start a different department that was more digital and marketing driven, because we had done a few projects in the marketing world, and I caught the bug for that, which was like really a lot of fun, and sort of reminded me of old school show pitching. So I had pitched that, and I was granted that, and I got a shingle off of Big Fish of my own. That was sort of where I wanted to be. Like I wanted to sort of start my own thing, and then like eventually see how it could grow, and dabble in different parts of the market. And within that year, that company was in talks, which I didn't know about. At this point, or actually like the heyday we talked about in 2008, the whole goal was sort of to get a hit show and then to be bought by a bigger company, right? So like you made a certain amount of money and you made a certain amount of series, and then a larger company would come in that owned 3 companies and buy you for a certain amount of money. And that was the goal, right? And that was sort of the payoff that all these people were working hard towards. And, Left Field was one of those companies that got bought by others. I mean, there's millions of them. Left Right, My Entertainment, like a million different companies, but that was just the way to go. Get a hit show, get bought, stay there for a little while, try and do as much as you can, but take that payout and walk into the sunset, and you were done in reality TV. So that was everybody's goal, and the goal of the company of Big Fish too. And they had that. So they were in talks with a lot of different companies about being bought out. And what that meant for me was like when a company is being bought by another company, like everybody knows, like nobody's ever safe, right? So within this little world that I was dabbling in for about a year, I didn't know that they were in real talks with MGM to be bought out there. And then once I guess that deal went through, I'm just guessing, but they look on a spreadsheet and they're like, what's this part department over here that I'm paying this amount for? Like, let's wipe that off the sheet. So they wiped me off the sheet and sent me walking, and then signed their papers to sign of like a multi-million-dollar deal to be bought out by MGM. And now MGM bought out by Amazon. So I think they're currently owned by Amazon right now. So
Yeah,
that was the hard reality of that.
that MGM deal, I think it was like $227 million they bought Big Fish. So they got, and when did they off you before that deal?
2 days before they announced, this was a company that sort of I came to. They were all very good friends of mine. I mean, our families were friends. It sort of was really like a personal push, even though, we're all told it's all business, and sure it was, but it felt very personal to me, and still kind of it's hard to talk about and hard to even figure, because I was like this close to sort of like what I've been since that conversation with my wife and leaving MTV. It was sort of really my goal, and I literally got there. I just didn't, get the taste of it. So network side, they're contingent to actual laws and legality, and have HR departments, and literally have to abide by certain rules and regulations, and sort of how they treat employees, right? Because all of it can warrant to lawsuits. And when you're an employee of a Viacom or a Paramount or an A&E Networks, there's an expectation of sort of how you're being dealt with. But when basically where I was, and where Sean, you have been, and Jen, you have been, is a freelance world, is like the rules bend, right? There are certain laws, there's certain kind of rules that sort of can be morphed and bent and shaped. And if for instance, you have a contract with a company for 2 years, it doesn't mean you're getting paid through that contract. Like that's just like they can figure out a way to say, you know what, no, like you didn't do your job, and try and prove me wrong.
And were you
um
in a contract? Is that Like,
I
are we?
I was. Yeah,
Oh,
I was negotiating a new one. And I had been 3 weeks into a new contract. So it actually cost me like $15,000 to negotiate that with the lawyer, and the tea leaves were there because in those negotiations they sort of started cutting me out of stuff that I was a part of, live PD being one of them. And I was just like, my lawyer was just like, "Hey, you should actually talk to them." And by the time I got a conversation to talk to them, they were like, "Listen, this is not going to work out. Today's your last day." And I said, "Okay, cool." And I left. An interesting way that all worked out, but yes, there was some negotiation that basically they had to ensure that I wasn't going to cause a fuss based on their buyout. So
and how does this work? Like, if you come up with the idea for live PD, do you own the IP for that?
no, because I had this is where a contract saves them. They own everything that I sort of come up with just by signing that contract, right? But they can get out of that contract at any minute they want to get out of it. So it benefits them. So whereas saying like any of that side of things is the Wild West, it's like these rules change all the time.
So they didn't technically break any rules, but it still feels
No,
pretty shitty.
yeah, 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 yeah. That's where it meant more. It was more personal than professional than anything else.
Right, like, "Thanks for creating the biggest show on cable. See you later, bye."
Pretty much,
Wow.
Damn.
No. But that's this business, man. It's heartless, right? It's ruthless,
it
brutal.
is.
It's brutal.
I think there's no rules. I think that's what you said, like, there's no rules.
Nope, not at all. I mean, I've left other companies in the past too that sort of wouldn't pay me out for certain shows that, like I was in sort of the commission based side, and things would air and they would say, "I don't owe you for that." I'd be like, "Yes, you do. So as my contract says." So, and they just don't pay, you know?
I mean, getting back to your early MTV days, kind of pulling a full circle here. I could be totally wrong, but it seems that part of the problem is that there's all these third parties. Like, if you work directly for the network, you're under the network company. There's no third party sharing responsibility and splitting responsibility and have these complex deals. It's one deal, one company, one sort of mandate, or how they want. But when you have third party deals, it's like, well, who's responsible? The employee of the company itself, or the executive. It's just complicated, I think, with all these um deals that where the money is pulled from various places.
Well, it's all these people getting paid a lot of money for a lot of years and not knowing what they want until it happens. Like, that's the funny part of it. It's just like, "Oh, this is exactly what we wanted." And you're like, "Okay, sure.
Yeah,
You knew better than
I
me."
feel like they're afraid to say yes. Afraid to take that risk, afraid to lose that job, that paycheck. They take that big swing and it doesn't hit, then they're freelancing too.
Which we all ended up here anyway, so
Yeah. Yeah.
We are in the business of risk. But so anyway, I'm sorry that you got cut like that, George. That hurts. I feel the pain for you, because after creating a big show like Live PD, and duking it out and overcoming all these obstacles, and being loyal to a company, and then just being cut because of this deal is kind of, that's not a great feeling.
it was an incredible experience and sort of like I would say, yeah, the demise at the end was, I was long gone at that point and sort of have no details on sort of how that created. But again, it goes to like every Friday night, we met on a Monday morning and we are like, well, it's still going. So there was always that hint of it being over at a certain point. But ironically, to your point, Jen, it still keeps going and some inclination and some sort of, some kind of form of one way or the other. But it came from a good place, and it came from an environment of vulnerability and pure development, and to your point, Sean, risk taking, and collectively, everybody involved, they're the champion of that show, and sort of, it's a lesson in sort of getting behind something, and to realize what's lightning in a bottle. I mean, we hear that a lot in our world, it's easy to recognize it as an armchair quarterback and sort of say, oh, of course that show is going to be great, right? But it's another thing to say, I think the show's going to be great, and that's my world, that's your world, that's everything we always do, that it feeds us every day and makes us more creative and want to find that next biggest thing, and be a part of it, and be a part of a community, that we've all spent 30 years in at this point, and are excited to still be a part of it. I am every day. I wake up and I'm wondering where that next idea is. So um, it'll never stop.
I don't think it can. Like, it's just inherent with who you are. Like, I think all of us filmmakers and producers, like the business, let's be honest, it sucks. It is tough, it's hard, it's unpredictable, it's chaotic. You don't know as a freelancer where your next paycheck is going to come, and that gets very stressful. But I think what pulls us back is, and make is just that joy of storytelling, like that's when, like exactly what you said, like when you capture that lightning in a bottle, when you capture a moment that you get to share with everybody and it helps understand our world better. There's a real magic to that. And I think, we're diehard like that to do this. And that's why I'm excited about this podcast, as we get to talk about these stories in a totally different format. But I know you have to go soon, but like what do you see as the future of TV? Where are we now? What's happening? Where's TV and everything going from your perspective?
I don't know. Like, what scares me is I watch my 14-year-old and my 11-year-old ingest content, and sort of it's not looking good. It's sort of, they don't sit and watch shows. It's not appointment viewing. It's here and now. The weird thing is that it keeps their attention for longer, right, than any shows than we would ever do, which is ironic, right? So it's shorter content that keeps them in their seat longer and captivated more. But like, nobody's figured out how to kind of do that, right? So Quibi tried. We all went on that Quibi vortex, which was short content that you were supposed to be online at Starbucks and be like, "Oh, I'll check out a 4-minute episode of this serial thing," and backed by a lot of money and complete failure. I don't know. I don't really know. I think that what we always hear as content creators is that there's always going to be content, but like, is it self-generated? Probably. And like, how do we make a living out of it? How do we sort of like walk into the later years of our career and sort of still keep our heads high and inspired? And I don't know. I think right now sports and true crime are the two things that sort of are the only things going, hottest things in the market. So it's sort of jumping to those worlds, or figuring out there's the whole tech world, right? So there's tech creation, and a friend of mine is working for a tech company doing AI stuff, and he was a live producer. So, there are certain bubbles. I don't know where it all goes. I don't see it all coming back to where we were before, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, it's tough, man. It's the creator economy, that whole YouTube thing. It's really amazing. I have a couple nephews about the same age as your kids, and it's all consumed through social. They don't. their viewing habits. No cable, like you said. It's I want it now. I get it now, and yeah, they don't wait for their favorite show to start at a certain time on a certain channel. That's just not how it's done anymore.
No, I gotta be honest with you. It's like it's the main way that my 14-year-old and I communicate is like I share Instagram stuff with him, and like we'll share 6 or 7 videos a day and not even talk about it, and I'll try and start that conversation. I'll be like, dude, did you see that video? He's like, yeah, I think so. I don't know. Like, but I'm trying to find different ways to communicate with this generation, which I think is sort of like very, kind of parallel to what we do, right? We're trying to communicate with this generation through content, and we've kind of reached sort of a blockade of how to do it. So I don't know. They're creating their own language right now. So it's like it's just they're just off and running, and they have no boundaries, and they're just subject to only one thing, and it's the Black Mirror, right? And it's an unusual time for sure.
I think it's probably, the Wild West in a different way, a different frontier. Like when we were at MTV in the early days, cable was exploding, and that was the Wild West. And there was no idea that was too crazy or weird. We just did it, and nobody knew how to do it. You were just figuring it out and building the plane as you go. And now it seems that that Wild West world is in the content creator space and the digital space. But it hasn't really taken shape exactly yet. I think it's forming, and I think everybody, that is built a career on cable and streaming and traditional TV type of shows, it's a it's a different it's a different beast we're dealing with. Not that that stuff will go away, but there's certainly going to be less of it.
No, it's going to be an idea. Mr. Beast is an idea, right? Live PD was an idea. Um, it's going to be something that can crack the code, can like Live PD sort of be in different spaces all at the same time, and you don't even realize that you want it, and it's just there. So hopefully, that keeps me waking up in the morning and inspired that it's going to be something that cracks the code, and we'll go from there. And that's always been my greatest challenge, and I'll never look back. I've always loved every single challenge I've ever been faced in my entire career, and I welcome them all. So yeah, again, not super excited because I'm old, but
You're
just
not.
still inspired by cracking the code, and that's always been my job. So
Let's crack the code.
Yeah.
and break the net.
Break the net. I love it. Well, thank you so much, George, for joining us. I loved listening to these stories, from MTV to Live PD, to the next steps. It's been really great to talk to you.
Yeah, both of you as well. I really appreciate the opportunity and the time, and I wish you all the success in this new format in this world, and I'm sure it'll be great.
Appreciate it. George, thank you for your time. Very, very much appreciated.